Welcome back to Conservative Conversations. I'm your host, Reid.
And I'm Frank.
Today we're going to be talking about Trump pandering for votes, positive trends in schools, and more. So let's get started. Before we get started, listeners, I'd like to remind you to please follow on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would greatly appreciate it. And to start off, as we are recording this episode, it is Memorial Day. So in honor of those who have given their lives for our country, we will have a brief moment of silence. And we thank you for those who have served and their families who support them. And for our first story, it's actually going to be related to the military. I had recently was listening to a show, I forget what show it was, so I'm not going to try to think of it. But in passing, somebody had mentioned that among the numerous things the military has lowered their standards on, which we have mentioned in the past, like fitness requirements, educational requirements, and stuff like that. One of the things I'd heard is that they had changed their policy on people who are trying to enroll that are HIV positive, which when I first heard that, I was like, holy cow, that sounds like absolutely crazy to me. Particularly if we're speaking about, military members who are serving in like direct combat roles or even close to combat roles. Because if you're like on the front line with somebody, say you're Joey, and you get shot and your buddy Jim next to you has got to try to save your life, he's kind of worried about your HIV positive blood getting on him, which is a danger. And so I wanted to look at like maybe an article that had come out around the time of this policy change. And I did find something from our own government website that provided a little more detail, and I'll do my best to read it off here. Okay, it was in June of 2022, the DoD, Department of Defense, updated its policy on HIV positive personnel serving in within the armed forces, in the view of significant advances in diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of HIV since the original policy was established. Under the department's updated policy, individuals who have been identified as HIV positive and are asymptomatic and who have a clinically confirmed undetectable viral load will have no restrictions applied to their deployability or their ability to commission while a service member, solely on the basis of their HIV positive status, nor will such individuals be discharged solely on the basis of their HIV positive status. So with that, after I read that, like the part about a confirmed undetectable load and stuff like that, that to me seemed less concerning as what had initially popped in my head. So maybe conditions like that are safer to, I guess, the individual themselves and to others. But I honestly don't know. I think if they're going to make changes like this, they should probably help try to educate other people so they understand the circumstances. Because, just like I originally thought, certainly I'm ignorant on all the implications of somebody who might be HIV positive, but if I was getting ready to join the military and I first heard that they're allowing HIV positive people to serve alongside me, I'd be slightly hesitant about it. I'd certainly have some concerns. And I just think that doesn't help go along with, their goal of actually increasing enrollment numbers. They're still having trouble meeting their recruitment numbers in the various branches of the military. And I'm not sure changes like these actually help. And, I mean, if this is mostly applied to, like, administrative type positions, then certainly that's less of a concern. Given compared to the example I gave earlier of people out in combat where they could be injured and exposing themselves. So, but I guess my main point of hearing this was, it's, like I said, it's slightly concerning, especially if it's somebody who doesn't quite understand the implications and meaning of it all. And I don't think it necessarily helps with the enrollment numbers.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. And I think it's certainly concerning. And I know, to me, it just seems like it's part of a broader thing that's going on in society. Because I've had this conversation before. I'm not sure if it was on the podcast or off the podcast, but it almost seems like within the broader society, HIV is almost being treated with kid gloves now. Because it used to be so concerning when back in the heyday.
Sure.
There was that old question of, can you get AIDS from a toilet seat? Do you remember that kind of propaganda stuff that was out there? But, and I'm glad to see that it's not just the boogeyman in the room anymore.
Right.
But, because of the medication. See, and that's where I don't want to end up going conspiratorial on this, but they have these new medications where if you're on the medication, then that's what it all comes down to, is the medication helps control your levels so that you're so low that it can't even be detected in clinical studies or I'm not sure exactly what I mean, but if your blood were tested, like you're saying, the viral load, the virus's presence is so low in your blood that it can't even be detected.
Right.
But you're still positive, and that would be a concern, because if you were to share blood or, like you were saying, be exposed to somebody's positive blood, well, here's the conspiracy part, is it's now you'd have to be on these medications yourself to control your viral level. So it's almost like this sort of conspiracy to just have everybody HIV positive and everybody on these drugs to control their levels.
Right. Well, not to, make light of it or whatever. It's almost like the phrase, like, if everybody has it, then nobody has it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it almost does seem to be trending that way, because I can tell you there are certain communities that HIV and AIDS are more prevalent in, and even now, with these meds, it's like, oh, it's no big deal. I'm on the medication. People even advertise that. Right. I'm on the medication, so there's nothing to be concerned about. And it's like, well, still, I don't want to become HIV positive, and I don't want to have to take meds every day or 3 times a day or whatever.
I remember in high school when we had to take sex ed classes, and they tell you just never take it on faith when a woman says she's on the pill, like a birth control pill. So, I feel like the same situation would apply here. It's like, just because they're advertising they're taking the medicine, I wouldn't necessarily trust it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, I don't know, it's a sticky situation.
Right, yeah.
I think there's a fine line there, and in a way, I think it's good that HIV positive people aren't treated like, aliens or, something to be terrified of.
Sure.
But in another way, I don't think that just everybody in the world should have HIV and
right, of course,
take medication to control it. So.
Yeah. Well, kind of like what you're saying. It's good that it's not quite as stigmatized, and and as I mentioned earlier, I'm certainly open to people who are HIV positive, like serving in more like administrative roles. Because when we did our Veterans Day special, interviewing my father and your grandfather, I believe I even mentioned to my dad that every role is important, even if you're at a desk. Somebody's got to do that job. So it's still important to serve your country in that way. I'm certainly open to having any type of people do those type of jobs.
Well, there still is a concern though, because often they'll do blood drives, or like if we were in serious combat, or if we were in a full-blown, let's say World War III type scenario,
for more serious roles.
Yeah, well, but there'd also be blood drives more often, and it's easier to go to your own personnel and say, okay, we need type A, type B negative, anybody who's type A must give.
Gotcha.
And there'd be a concern because, okay, the HIV is undetectable, but it's still present, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a scientist.
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of why I kind of said earlier that I'm ignorant to some of this. I certainly haven't studied HIV in any manner. But yeah, I get what you're coming from there. It is concerning, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess that's all I got on that story. Hopefully, it doesn't have too much negative impact on our military.
Yeah, I would certainly hope for that as well. Well, then, to take us into Trump news, there's been a lot of headlines about him.
He's a walking headline machine.
Yes, he is. Well, he just recently did a big, what do you call it, like a rally.
Yeah,
he did a big rally in the Bronx, and that was very interesting to see. There's been debates about how large the crowd was, which we've seen before. Yeah. But I thought it was interesting. Somebody did some analysis and said that the permit he had for that venue only allowed 3,500 people to be present. But there were more people than that showed up. And even though they weren't allowed in, a lot of them stood at the gates, so to speak, and still tried to listen. So, of course, the Trump campaign wants to say one number, maybe 10,000, and the media wants to push back on that and say there wasn't anywhere close to 10,000 people. Right. So I just think that's interesting because it's like we've seen this movie before, But there's also been some really good reaction. There were some media people who sent reporters to the rally to interview some of the rally goers, and they were shocked at sort of the different ethnicities of the people who were there, how many different ethnicities were represented, how many people from sort of all walks of life were present.
They were shocked at all these different races that showed up?
Yes.
Oh, sounds like a racist.
I know. Absolutely. I agree with you, but it was interesting because the reporters are there in the crowd and they're saying, well, aren't you concerned about some of the things he's tweeted and some of the things he's said over the years and, the Charlottesville thing, they always want to bring that up and, calling these other countries shitholes and that kinds of stuff, basically all of his highlights, his negative highlights. And these people in the crowds were like, no, stop right there. And they're like, the price of food is through the roof. The price of gas is through the roof. And some of these people were saying that they've never voted before and they're going to vote for Trump. Some of them said that they voted for Obama twice and they voted for Joe Biden the last time. And they're going to be first-time Trump voters. So, yeah, I mean, the media, they're always sort of baffled, but they were very baffled by these people in the Bronx, reacting to this. And, of course, AOC, she had a lot to say.
Yeah, that's her district.
That's her district, yeah. And she was out saying that Trump could have gone to more friendly boroughs, like why he did it in the Bronx. she doesn't understand.
I heard her say it was an embarrassment to himself.
Well, I don't think it was.
Of course it's not. You think that man's embarrassed to go to the Bronx and talk to the people? He'll go shake hands with anybody.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I think to me it just highlights how sort of dumb they are.
Right? They have no idea.
And, obviously there were a lot of people who were very proud to go and listen to Trump and represent themselves and be interviewed by the media and, put themselves out there, so to speak. So I just thought that was very interesting. I don't think her analysis brought very much to the table at all whatsoever. And plus, what good would it do? Her point was there are friendlier places he could have gone. Well, I think it's very cool of Trump to be doing these things in sort of unfriendly spaces.
That's where he needs to be.
Yes, trying to make inroads and, shake hands he wouldn't normally shake and meet people he wouldn't normally meet.
Yeah, because at this point, it's not really the Republicans he's got to convince to vote for him now. I mean, there's obviously still some.
Sure.
But now the focus is the rest of the people. Now that the primaries are essentially officially over, they've practically been over for a couple months now. But the focus is now squarely on the general election and the general public.
Yep. Well, in that same vein, another thing is Trump just went before the Libertarian National Convention and made a speech, basically asking for their votes, for them to nominate him on their ticket and vote for him.
Right.
And it's been interesting the way the media has covered that as well, because there were certain things that he said that elicited boos from the crowd. And that's what the media captured. And, if you turn on CNN or MSNBC or ABC right now, that's what they're highlighting. They're highlighting the times that the crowd booed at Trump. But he said a lot in his pitch before the Libertarians, and not all of what he said received boos. There were times that the crowd cheered and were overjoyed. I mean, there were times where everybody stood up in sort of a standing ovation style reaction. But I think it was interesting, he said that if they didn't nominate him, that they would continue to draw only about 3% of the national vote, which I thought was hilarious. And that's what they all booed at. But it's true.
Yeah.
That's a true statement. I mean, I don't think they've run any candidate where they've gotten over 3% of the national vote.
Right.
Ever. So I think that's a fair point, for him to say, if you guys want to promote yourselves, a little more out of obscurity, to nominate a very large, well-known candidate who actually has a shot,
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting for him to sort of speak the truth. But then, just as a side comment here, I'll say RFK was also there, and he elicited some boos from the crowd, but I didn't really listen to his speech. I definitely didn't listen to the whole national convention. I mean, I go a little libertarian on certain issues, but I'm not a libertarian,
right,
so didn't watch the whole thing. But on the flip side, I did see some negative things out of both of these. The incident in the Bronx, his rally there, and him speaking before the Libertarians. I saw some potentially concerning things, and I think this happens sort of like with all politicians.
Yeah.
When you're trying to get yourself out there and shake hands and make those inroads, you sometimes inadvertently get yourself associated with people who nobody would want to be associated with, And in the Bronx, he brought up two rappers who endorsed him on stage. One, I only remember one's name. His name is Sleepy Hollow. I don't remember the other rapper, though, who was up there. But those rappers that he brought on the stage, it has since been discovered that they're both associated with a gang murder plot Now, I'm not sure the particulars of that, but of course the media, have been trying to make a firestorm out of it. Trump gets the endorsement of 2 gang murderers,
Right.
that kind of thing. And I think that's unfortunate,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I think that's very unfortunate because people who are on the fence or in the middle, who
Right.
don't have their minds made up, that kind of thing might scare them away
Sure, yeah.
or stop them from considering Trump any further.
Mhm.
And
Right. Oh, and that's all that the media outlet needs. Is
right,
that one little headline that
exactly.
might give them cause for concern.
That's exactly like sharks. They smell blood in the
Mhm.
water. Yeah. Well, there's another thing is at the Libertarian National Convention, he said a few things that really got the crowd going, but the biggest one was he promised that on day one, that if he got their votes, that on day one, he would pardon the founder of the Silk Road. Do you remember that website? It's gotten a lot of flack. I think the FBI shut it down, and they put the founder, Ross Ulbricht is his name. He got sentenced to life in prison, and Trump said that he would pardon this man on day one for time served. That would be his sentence, time served, and he'd be done, out, free man. And I think that's concerning too because the Silk Road was not a positive website. There were some very concerning things that came out of that website. Human trafficking, drug trafficking. It existed on the dark web. People had to use these alternative currencies like Bitcoin to make their transactions. It's basically just not safe.
Yeah.
There's a reason the FBI had to get involved. There's a reason the FBI shut it down. There's a reason this man was sentenced to life in prison.
Right.
Now, think what you will, feel what you will. I can't say that I really followed the Silk Road case too much, but I know how I feel about it. And it gives me the heebie-jeebies, the idea that you can just go on there and buy illicit substances or buy
almost anything.
Yes, almost anything under the sun. It's scary. And to me, the idea of Trump making promises like this is scary.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't it sort of imply that the Silk Road would just be back in operation again if this guy were let out? I mean, I guess not necessarily, but
Yeah, right. Certainly not necessarily because the landscape has certainly changed.
But there are certain implications to it.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would want to be associated with that or associate myself or see my favorite president in my lifetime associated with things like that.
Right. It's definitely concerning, kind of like with the rappers that endorsed him. I mean, this kind of stuff causes people on the fence to be a little more concerned.
Right.
And I would guess that, I mean, if the Libertarians would have actually picked him as the nominee or really came around to support him, I could see him possibly doing it. But upon first, thinking about it, to me, it probably just seems like one of those things Trump is saying to try to get their vote.
Yes, but see, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up here is, I sort of understand the whole campaign promise thing.
Sure.
But it just makes me wonder if, okay, two things. Trump was sort of known for not being a political insider.
Right.
He was an outsider. He was going to drain the swamp. That's why he got a lot of votes the first time, is people said, this is a man who spent his life in business, not in politics. So let's give him a shot, So that's one thing, is now I see him acting more like a politician, making these kind of false promises, anything to get the vote.
I see that.
Yes, and I think that's very concerning. And secondly, it kind of goes hand in hand with that, but I wonder if he wouldn't start to lose his base. Like, it concerns me. Not enough for him to lose my vote, but
right, sure.
At some point, as he's doing this song and dance and making these false promises and acting more like a politician now more than ever, I wonder if it wouldn't turn off some of those same people that voted for him the first time.
Right, yeah, I get that.
So I just want to bring that up. I guess just food for thought,
Sure.
But to me, it's concerning and sort of not on brand.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't really like it all that much. But I guess in my opinion, I'm not super concerned about it. Like I said, I definitely don't like it. I wish that's not something he would have said, but he said it, so not much I could do.
Right.
Is that all you got for that?
That is all I got for that. Yeah.
All right. Well, my last set of stories is all school related. First, I saw an article from the Daily Caller that's talking about how in Florida, some of the public school districts are considering closing some of their campuses due to low enrollment. And it'd probably be hard to tell this early if it's really due to the school choice legislation that was passed last year, but that's like the implication that's being made, at least, that for the 2023 school year, private school enrollment was up by like 29,000 students from K to 12.
It's a pretty good number.
Yeah, I mean, just compared to the year before, so that's a decent number. So hopefully the trend continues, and we'll actually be able to tell if it really is more related to the school choice legislation. Because if parents are given the ability to put their students in their preferred school, I know a lot of these other schools that aren't doing so well are going to lose enrollments, and they'll close down as it's being reported. And either that, or they're just going to have to change, how they teach their students, or whatever it is that is causing their enrollments to drop. So yeah, I thought was a positive story regarding schools, and we hope to see it continue, because we've talked about school choice issues before on this channel. And another one that's related to schools, it's a little bit more local to us. Down in Cincinnati, there is a school called the Cincinnati Country Day School, and they have implemented at the start of the 2023 school year a no cell phones policy during school hours, and they have been seeing positive results from that. Both students and teachers have said that there's more social interactions during like free period. The kids are, talking to each other rather than sitting on the phones individually. One student had said that she actually goes home with less homework because she gets it done during her free period instead of having her cell phone out and not doing her homework. And of course, principals and teachers have reported like better behavior amongst the children and more social interaction. And this had also reminded me that earlier in the year, I'd heard a very similar story of the Orange County school districts in Florida implementing a no cell phone policy, and talk about very similar results. More positive interactions amongst the students, less bullying, less distractions, better academic progress. So I think it'd be pretty neat to kind of see this start coming to more schools, because you and I grew up kind of like in the in-between stages. We didn't really have phones until late middle school, high school time.
Right.
Whereas some kids now have them as soon as they're getting into middle school, and may even have them before then. Who knows? Some parents give their little elementary school kids phones. But no, it definitely seems that some of these schools that have tried it are definitely seeing good benefits from it and positive outcomes, and because they've definitely had plenty of time to really study how cell phones have impacted students. Because, like I said, there's certainly a time not long ago where the students didn't have cell phones in the school or in class or anything like that, and they can compare like test scores and like incident reports and stuff like that to times with and without cell phones, and it seems the results are showing for themselves.
Well, I think that's very interesting. Like you said, we grew up in a sort of in-between time. I love how you phrased that, because I think society en masse could agree with this, but it seemed like the cell phones being in the hands of small children, minor children, really spiked after 9/11 because there was such a concern for the parents to be able to reach their child in a moment of crisis.
Right.
But back then, the cell phones were much more limited than what the cell phones have the capability to do now, as far as surfing the web and access to all these applications, these various things. The
notifications.
Yes, the GPS tracking, some of the privacy concerns. So I think that is good, that minor children... I mean, because just to put it simply, the cell phones used to be simpler back in the day.
Yeah.
You can make cell phone calls and text messages.
Yep.
It was pretty rare, I would say even up to the point when we graduated, when we were 18, that cell phones really had the same access to the internet that we see today.
Right.
Now, I think some phones did have access to the internet, but it just wasn't as fast. It didn't work as well. There weren't
as many people who had those types of phones at that time.
Right. And what's really interesting to me is I tried to find the article before we went on air, but we actually studied this. I think I was in 11th grade when I took sociology, and we did an interclass study. So we had a group of 9th graders, a group of 10th graders, a group of 11th graders, and a group of 12th graders that all participated in this study. And all it was a questionnaire. It was totally voluntary. And it just asked them questions like, how does your phone have access to the internet? How many hours a day do you use your phone? How many calls do you take? How many texts do you send? This kinds of questions, And we were shocked when we studied the results that everybody scored it very low. They said, I only use my phone 0 to 3 hours a day. No, I never use my phone in class. They scored very low on everything. And when we went to analyze the data, the best answer that we could come up with is, well, maybe because this study was taking part in school and part of a school study, maybe kids didn't want to say the truth. They didn't want to say, yes, I use my phone in class, or yes, I use my phone 12 hours a day. So, we sort of did our own hypothesizing as to why the data was so low. But I was the main author on our study results, and the one thing that I found absolutely fascinating was the last question on the study was, do your parents restrict your cell phone use in any way? And there were only like 3 students in the whole study that said, yes, my parents place some kind of restrictions on my cell phone use.
Right.
So even at that time, I thought that was fascinating, that parents weren't checking on what their what their children did with the phones.
Right.
They weren't checking to see how many calls they were made or who they were calling or how many texts they made or who they were texting or, part of the study was, does your phone have access to the internet? But I don't remember those results. I think they were very mixed at that time. Like we were just saying, I think the cell phones were a lot more limited as to their internet capabilities. Right. But I felt that was the only thing that the students had answered honestly, was that their parents were not watching their cell phone use. So it was a very interesting study.
Yeah.
If I can find it and recreate it, I'll try to put it up on the website or something like that.
Right.
But I think that it'd be a very good trend to, maybe the kids should have access to a cell phone, like sort of in the whole 9/11 vein.
Right. Well, at least in both of these examples, they do say that they are allowed to go access the phones in emergencies.
Right.
In particular, the one for the school near Cincinnati, it's a video, and one of the things that I believe was the principal was talking about was kind of like the safety and situation, and he talked about how the local police department had said that they believe in real emergency situations at the school, it can actually be better for the students not to have their cell phones, because one of the main things I heard him say was the spreading of the information, because you know how some students are, especially in a panic emergency, they might not be communicating the proper info about the situation to each other, to their families, and then the families or the students themselves are trying to call the police and all
or
sorts
they might not be listening to the administrators, when they're saying get to shelter, they're more concerned about reaching their parent or something to that effect.
Right. Yeah, so he kind of at least the way I understood it is the not having access to the cell phones kind of helps cut down on confusion in the times where there is a real emergency. And of course the school still has several landline accesses,
right.
So students aren't completely without being able to get a hold of somebody.
I just think it's probably good as far as helping to calm anxiety, both on the part of the parents and the students, to know, that I still do have my cell phone if I needed it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's very interesting, and I'm glad to see that there's a positive trend in that. But I think it makes sense that there would only be a positive trend in that.
Right? I think so too. So yeah, I guess to wrap that up. Yeah, it is good to see the positive trend with the no cell phones. I think beyond just the academics, I think it is good for kids that age to actually socialize with each other instead of having only internet friends that they don't actually go see and really communicate with, other than emojis and text messages or whatever.
Right.
So it's good to see that, and it's good to see that parents are having more options for their kids to go to school and to find schools that best fit their needs. So hopefully we see more positive trends in school choice.
Yes, it is good to have more competition in that space, I think.
Yep. And that's all I got for the schools.
Well, that's all I got.
Okay. And I believe that is all we got for today. And if you enjoyed this great conservative conversation, please go follow on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and many more. Just search for Conservative Conversations. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can search at Conservative Conversations 92, and we should show up. And we love it if you give it a subscribe.
That's right. We hope you might share us with a friend or two. And if you'd like to support our work, we would greatly appreciate that. And as always, we thank you for listening.